I've been delving into this fascinating game played by former world champion Alexander Alekhine. So you can see a picture of him on screen. He was world champion twice, and this game here has a really interesting backstory, because when I was reading about this, we can see that the first kind of 10 moves of this game follow an actual game that he played in a 1915 championship in Moscow, Russia, against a real player called Grigoriev. Now, this game here, as you can see on screen, the player of the black pieces has no name, and so what seems to have transpired here is that this is the game that Alekhine wishes he had played against Grigoriev. But the reason it kind of got lost in chess myth, was it a real game, was it fake, was that he published it in a later book as though it was a real game, but it was all kind of a bit shrouded. I don't want to go too deep on all the details, but it seems to be a fake that he composed himself, but it's still very beautiful and what could have happened in that game against Grigoriev. So let's have a look here. Alekhine kicks off with e4. We had e6 in response, the French defense, d4, d5, knight c3, and if you go for bishop b4 here, this is the main line winnower variation, very sharp, and white can follow up with things like queen to g4 because the pawn's no longer defended. Very, very tactical, fun games. But we had knight f6, the classical variation, and I mention this because now we get bishop g5 from white and bishop b4 from black. So it's similar to the winnower here, very sharp, very complicated, but it's called the McCutcheon variation. Now e5 was played by white, you want to win a piece, but we have pawn h6, not letting white just do that. And there are lots of moves here, it's a very rich position. You could drop this bishop back here or here, even here potentially, but we had takes here instead, black takes here, now takes on g7 hitting the rook, so it slides over, and now pawn h4 was played, good move, because if this one is captured here, well then you can take on g5, let's say queen recaptures, well now you go knight f3, you're hitting the queen, you've got an open line for your rook, you can play pawn g3 at the right moment, decent position for white. So we didn't have the pawn taken on g7, instead we had captures on h4 here, and now the queen comes to g4, holds that g7 pawn, also attacks this one in some lines. So, you can't go e5, for example, here, opening bishop. This is just good for white. So bishop e7 was now played, coming back. I mean, it's not the most accurate move because you've now gone to b4 and back, but okay, we'll follow the game here. And now pawn g3 here. Alekhine's got this idea of just running this one down the board if he can. And if you capture there, it's not so good because you go rook h8 and you're just completely winning the game. So that's why the pawn didn't take on g3. Instead, c5 was played, countering at the center. And now this is where we part ways. So in the actual game with Grigoriev, we had castles queenside, knight c6, takes, pawn, queen a5 here. And this is where the game just carried on from, and Alekhine actually went on to lose it with the white pieces. But what we had here instead of castles queenside was takes now on h4, looking to run it down, and it's like this is the move that Alekhine wished he had played. So in response we had takes on d4, but the knight didn't move now, pawn h5 was played, takes, pawn h6, takes, the rook slides across, and now we had queen a5 check, king e2, all fairly forced so far. But this next move is not forced, so queen takes on a2 was played. This is a big mistake. Actually best is this amazing computer move of bishop to f8. You can also start checking with queen a6 check, but if you go bishop f8 here, the beautiful idea is that if you carry on with this pawn push, you can actually take here and you're on the queen now. So if you take here, you take back, you cover the square. If instead you promote the pawn like this, well now you can actually take here. Again, black is doing well in this position because you did give up a knight on c3, don't forget. So it's all very sharp, but the computer finds this amazing resource. But we had queen takes on a2 here instead, hitting the unprotected rook. So pawn h7 was played. The queen now took on b1. We had takes here, queening, and now king to d7, and queen takes on f7, threatening this pawn and also then trying to pick up this bishop. So we had takes here with check first, king f3, and now knight c6 played to hold this bishop here. This one now took anyway, king c7, and now queen f4 check, drives the king out into the board, doesn't let it jump back here, so it came to b6. We had another check, the bishop now blocked, and here white makes a further queen. You can also, by the way, play bishop d3 here as a decent move, but this pawn queened, now this pawn queened, and so here's where we reach the position of 5 queens on the board. Very aesthetically pleasing, of course. You very rarely see more than 4. Now the rook came to h6 here, and this is really one of the star moves of the game. Even though you've got all of these queens on the board, not one of them moves. Instead, the rook moves in this position, an understated move here, and it pins this knight, which sets up all sorts of attacking threats. So we now had queen takes on f1 here. Actually, the best move here is bishop to g4 check. The whole idea is that you open up the rook, and after the queen, say, takes this one, well, now you take here, queen recaptures with check. You can block back like this, but as you can see here, you know, it's 2 queens on 2 here. You've got the rook, and here you've got the knight and this one, and then there's 2 pawns for the bishop, and there are drawing chances for black here. So that was the way to go, bishop g4 check, but the queen took on f1, and now this sets up a beautiful mating sequence. So we had bishop b4 check, taking advantage of the fact that both minor pieces are pinned to the king. Now this one came back to b5. We had queen d8 check, again using advantage of that pinned knight. The king moved across. Now the other one joined the attack, checks from the a file here. This one came back, and it sets up this beautiful checkmate now. This was the final position here. So a very interesting game, despite the fact that it would seem it was a composed game. I do hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to see another epic chess game, then click here. And to never miss a future video, do consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.